This is a charity event for married donors, not for secret dates.
The floorboard creaked like a dying cat every time Rachel walked over it. At 2 a.m, hunched over with my toolbox spread across our bedroom floor, I figured fixing it might be the only thing left in this marriage I could actually repair. If only marriages were as easy to fix as old oak, I muttered, driving another screw into the subflooring. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, Thomas Blake, a guy who'd built a fortune fixing other people's broken dreams through venture capital, and I couldn't fix the most important thing in my own life. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. That's when her phone lit up on the nightstand. Ding. The message preview glowed like a neon sign in Vegas. Can't wait to celebrate with you tomorrow night, beautiful. The champagne is already chilling. L. My screwdriver slipped, gouging the wood. 22 years of marriage, and it all came down to a text message from some guy named L. I'd suspected for months. The late nights, the new perfume, the way she'd started looking through me like I was furniture that had gone out of style. But suspecting and knowing are two different animals entirely. I heard her car in the driveway, the purr of her BMW cutting through the November chill. Rachel always did like expensive things, including, apparently, other men. The front door opened with that particular careful quiet of someone trying not to wake a sleeping spouse. Too bad for her, I'd given up on sleep around the same time I'd given up on us. Thomas? Her voice drifted up the stairs, surprised and slightly panicked. What are you doing awake? Just fixing this loose board, I called back, my voice steady as Sunday morning coffee. You know how it is. Some things need attention before they fall apart completely. She appeared in the doorway, still wearing that black dress I'd complimented her on earlier, before she'd claimed she was going to work late with Janice on the Morrison account, before I'd discovered that Janice had posted Instagram photos of herself at home with her kids all evening. Nice night for a drive, huh? I asked, not looking up from my work. Rachel fumbled with her purse, that designer clutch that cost more than most people made in a week. I told you I was working late with Janice. We had a lot to discuss about the Morrison project. I finally looked at her, really looked at her. She was beautiful, always had been. Striking cheekbones, auburn hair that caught light like fire, green eyes that had once made me forget my own name. But tonight, those eyes were darting around the room like a trapped animal looking for an exit. You always wear new perfume when you're working overtime? I asked, standing up and brushing sawdust off my jeans. That's not the Chanel I bought you for Christmas. Her face flushed. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you don't. I packed my tools with deliberate slowness, each clank of metal against metal echoing in the sudden silence. How's Lance, by the way? The color drained from her face like water from a broken sink. Bingo. I don't know anyone named Lance, she said, but her voice had gone up an octave. Rachel always was a terrible liar, one of the things I'd loved about her when we were young and stupid and thought love could conquer anything. Huh. That's funny because someone named Lance seems to know you pretty well. Well enough to have champagne chilling for tomorrow night. She opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again like a fish gasping for air. Finally, she managed, You went through my phone? Didn't have to. You left it face up, sweetheart. Technology makes cheating so much more convenient these days, doesn't it? Though apparently not more discreet. Rachel's shock transformed into anger, the righteous indignation of someone caught red-handed trying to flip the script. How dare you spy on me? Spy? I laughed, but there wasn't any humor in it. Honey, reading a text message that lights up like Times Square isn't spying. It's just having functioning eyeballs. She stormed toward the walk-in closet, her heels clicking against the hardwood like gunshots. I don't have to listen to this. No, I agreed, settling into the armchair by the window. You don't. But you might want to stick around for the conversation we're going to have tomorrow about our financial arrangements. She froze, one hand on the closet door. What's that supposed to mean? I smiled, but it felt like broken glass in my mouth. It means you might want to double-check exactly what you think you're entitled to in this marriage, Rachel. Some surprises aren't the good kind. She slammed the closet door hard enough to rattle the windows, after she'd locked herself in the guest bedroom, because apparently that's where cheating wives sleep when they get caught. I made my way downstairs to my home office. The house felt different now, like the walls themselves knew what had happened. 22 years of shared history, and it had all crumbled in the space of a text message. I opened my father's old safe, the one he'd installed behind a false panel next to my desk. Inside, among other important documents, were the trust papers that Rachel had never bothered to read carefully. She'd been too excited by the dollar signs to pay attention to the fine print. My father, God rest his ornery soul, had been a mechanic who'd invested every spare penny in real estate during the 1970s and 80s. By the time he died 5 years ago, that simple mechanic had accumulated nearly $100 million in assets. But Frank Blake hadn't been stupid, and he'd known his daughter-in-law well enough to structure his estate accordingly. The money was mine, all right, but it was locked in an irrevocable trust that I couldn't touch for personal expenses. Every penny had to go toward charitable causes, specifically the Frank Blake Foundation for Community Development. I was the trustee, not the beneficiary. I could direct where the money went, but I couldn't spend it on myself or my family. Rachel had never bothered to understand the distinction. She'd just seen the bank statements, and dollar signs had danced in her eyes like slot machine reels. I traced my finger along the trust documents, smiling for the first time in months. "Good luck, honey," I whispered to the empty room. "Hope Lance likes women who bring more debt than assets to the table." The floorboard upstairs creaked again, Rachel pacing in the guest room, probably calling her sister or her lawyer or maybe Lance himself. It didn't matter. Let her make her plans. I had plans of my own, and mine had the advantage of being based on reality instead of fantasy. I poured myself 3 fingers of the good bourbon, the 20-year-old stuff I'd been saving for a special occasion. Seemed like discovering your wife's betrayal qualified as special, even if not in the way I'd originally intended. The November wind rattled the windows, and I settled back in my father's old leather chair to think. Rachel wanted to play games? Fine. But she was about to learn that some games have rules she'd never bothered to read, and I'd always been very, very good at reading the fine print. The glass hammer hadn't changed in 30 years, which was exactly why I loved it. Same cracked vinyl booths, same neon beer signs casting rainbow shadows on scarred wooden tables, same smell of stale cigarettes and broken dreams. It was the kind of place where a man could drink his troubles without judgment and get honest advice from people who'd made every mistake in the book. Eddie Kowalski was polishing glasses behind the bar when I walked in, his thick forearms moving with the practiced efficiency of a man who'd been slinging drinks since the Reagan administration. He looked up as the door chimed, his weathered face breaking into a grin. "Tommy Blake, twice in 1 week? Either you're having a midlife crisis, or Rachel finally figured out what a pain in the ass you are." "Door number 2, I said, sliding onto my usual bar stool, though I'm thinking the midlife crisis might be more fun. Eddie's expression shifted from jovial to concerned in the space of a heartbeat. He'd known me since we were kids stealing apples from Mrs. Henderson's tree, and he could read my moods better than a meteorologist reads storm clouds. "Ah, shit. What happened?" "Found out my wife's been test driving other models while I've been working late." Eddie winced and poured 2 shots of bourbon without being asked. "Sorry, man. That's rough. Anyone I know?" "Guy named Lance. Ring any bells?" Eddie's eyes narrowed as he thought. "Lance Duvall? art dealer, drives that white Porsche like he's trying to compensate for something? That's the one. Oh, Tommy. Eddie shook his head. That guy's bad news. Word around town is he's leveraged up to his eyeballs, lives in that fancy penthouse downtown, but half the contractors in the city are still waiting to get paid for work they did on his gallery. I knocked back the bourbon, feeling it burn away some of the anger. Well, that explains the champagne and celebration. Rachel probably told him about the inheritance. The one from your old man? The very same, except she never bothered to read the paperwork. It's all locked up in a charitable trust. I can't touch a dime for personal use. Eddie whistled low. So she's planning to leave you for a broke art dealer who thinks he's marrying into money that doesn't actually exist? That about sums it up. Jesus, it's like watching a train wreck in slow motion. Eddie refilled our glasses. What are you going to do? I stared at the amber liquid, watching the bar's neon lights dance across its surface. I'm going to let her dig her own grave, but I might help her find a shovel. The next morning, I called Gloria Martinez, my father's old lawyer, and the only person I trusted with family business. Gloria was 73 years old, looked like everyone's favorite grandmother, and had the legal instincts of a shark that hadn't eaten in a week. Thomas, she said, settling into the chair across from my desk with a cup of coffee and a manila folder thick enough to choke a horse. I've been expecting this call for months. You saw this coming? Honey, I've been practicing family law for 45 years. I can spot a marriage in trouble from 3 counties away. Your wife's been asking questions about the trust for the better part of a year. That hit me like a punch to the gut. She's been planning this that long? Longer, probably. She called my office last spring asking about hypothetical scenarios involving trust dissolution in case of divorce. My secretary told her she'd need to make an appointment and bring documentation. She never called back. I leaned back in my chair, feeling pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. So she's been working on this for months, maybe longer. The affair with Lance is just the exit strategy. That would be my guess. The good news is that your father was smarter than both of us combined. This trust is bulletproof. She can't touch the principal, she can't claim it as a marital asset, and she sure as hell can't get half of it in a divorce. What can she get? Gloria opened the folder and pulled out a stack of documents. The house. You bought it before the marriage, but she's made improvements that might give her a claim to some equity. Your business. She's not involved in day-to-day operations, but she might argue she's entitled to appreciation in value during the marriage, and whatever liquid assets you have in joint accounts. How much are we talking about? Maybe $200,000 if she gets everything she's asking for and the judge is having a bad day. Certainly not the millions she's expecting. I couldn't help but smile. She's going to be disappointed. Disappointed is one word for it. Financially ruined might be more accurate, especially if she's been making plans based on money that doesn't exist. We spent the next hour going over strategy. Gloria would handle the legal side, but she suggested I start documenting everything. Rachel's behavior, her absences, any evidence of the affair that might be relevant to the proceedings. One more thing, Gloria said as she gathered her papers. You might want to consider moving some of the trust money around. Nothing improper, you understand. But there are several community projects that could use funding. Better to have the money working for good causes than sitting in accounts where it might give your wife ideas. What did you have in mind? Well, there's that community center project you've been working on, the one in the old warehouse district. It could use a significant capital infusion to get it up and running. I'd been working on the community center project for 2 years, a place where kids from low-income families could get tutoring, job training, and a safe place to go after school. It was exactly the kind of thing my father would have supported, and exactly the kind of project the trust was designed to fund. How significant? Significant enough to make a statement, and significant enough to require a big public announcement, maybe even a gala fundraiser to celebrate the opening. Now I was starting to see where Gloria's devious legal mind was heading. A fundraiser where Rachel would be expected to play the supportive wife? Unless, of course, she's too busy with other commitments to attend. That afternoon, I called Shannon Murphy, my assistant, and the most competent person I'd ever worked with. Shannon was 32, had an MBA from Northwestern, and could organize a military invasion if I asked her to. She also had the kind of sharp wit that made her invaluable for navigating the social politics of business and charity work. "I need you to start planning a fundraising gala," I told her. 3 weeks from now. The Frank Blake Community Center is getting a major donation, and we need to make it an event. Shannon raised an eyebrow. 3 weeks? That's not much time to plan a major event. I have confidence in your abilities. Besides, it doesn't need to be perfect, it just needs to be public. This wouldn't have anything to do with the fact that Rachel's been acting strange lately, would it? Shannon was observant, another quality that made her indispensable. What makes you say that? She called here yesterday asking about your father's estate. Specifically, she wanted to know if you had access to liquid assets from the trust. I told her she'd need to talk to you directly about financial matters. Good. What else? She's been asking around town about divorce lawyers. My cousin works at Patterson & Associates. She mentioned that Rachel came in for a consultation last week. The pieces were falling into place faster than I'd expected. Rachel wasn't just having an affair, she was building a case, or trying to anyway. Shannon, I need you to do something for me, and it needs to stay between us. Of course. Start spreading the word that I'm having some financial difficulties. Nothing specific, just hints that maybe the inheritance isn't as solid as people think. Let people draw their own conclusions. Shannon's eyes lit up with understanding. You want Rachel's friends to think you're broke? I want them to think I might be broke. There's a difference. Can you handle that without it seeming like it's coming from me? Please. I've been managing your reputation for 5 years. A little strategic misdirection will be fun. That evening, Rachel came home late again, claiming she'd been showing properties to a client. She was getting bolder with her lies, probably because she thought I was too stupid or too trusting to figure out what was really going on. How was your day? She asked, settling at the kitchen island with a glass of wine and her phone. Interesting. I had a meeting with Gloria Martinez about the community center project. Rachel's head snapped up from her phone. Oh? What about? Funding. Looks like we might be able to make a significant donation to get it up and running. How significant? Significant enough that we're planning a fundraising gala to announce it. 3 weeks from Saturday. You'll need to clear your calendar. I watched her face carefully as she processed this information. She was trying to look pleased, but I could see the calculations running behind her eyes. A big public donation meant less money for her to claim in a divorce. That's wonderful, she said, but her voice sounded like she was reading from a script. I'm sure it will be a lovely event. I'm sure it will be, assuming you're available, of course. I know how busy you've been lately. Of course I'll be available. It's important to support your charitable work. Her phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it, and her cheeks flushed pink. Work? I asked. Yes, the Morrison project is very demanding. I'm sure it is. That night, after Rachel had gone to bed, I sat in my office and made a list of everything I knew and everything I suspected. The affair with Lance, the consultation with divorce lawyers, the questions about the trust, the lies about working late. My wife was planning to leave me, and she thought she was going to take half of my father's fortune with her. She'd been planning it for months, maybe longer, and she thought I was too stupid to see it coming. She was about to learn that underestimating Thomas Blake was a very expensive mistake. I poured myself another bourbon and started planning my own strategy. If Rachel wanted to play games, I'd give her a game she'd never forget. But the rules were going to be mine, and the house always wins in the end. The floorboard upstairs creaked as she walked to the bathroom. I'd fixed the loose board, but somehow the sound remained. Maybe some things were just meant to make noise when pressure was applied. I raised my glass to the ceiling in a mock toast. Game on, sweetheart. The courthouse smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams, a combination that seemed appropriate for the dissolution of a 22-year marriage. I sat next to Gloria in the plaintiff's section, watching Rachel and her lawyer, Carson Mitchell, whisper urgently at their table. Carson was everything you'd expect from a high-end divorce attorney: expensive suit, perfect hair, and the kind of smile that made you want to count your fingers after shaking hands. He'd built his reputation on taking wealthy husbands to the cleaners, and he clearly thought I was going to be another trophy for his wall. All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Williams. Judge Williams was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who'd seen every dirty trick in the book and had no patience for theatrics. She settled behind her bench and opened the case file. This is a preliminary hearing in the matter of Blake versus Blake. Mr. Mitchell, I understand your client is seeking temporary spousal support and an injunction preventing the disposition of marital assets. Carson stood with the confidence of a man who thought he held all the cards. That's correct, Your Honor. Mrs. Blake has reason to believe that her husband is attempting to hide assets, specifically a substantial inheritance from his deceased father. Mr. Martinez? Judge Williams looked at Gloria. Gloria rose slowly, like a grandmother getting up from Sunday dinner. Your Honor, we welcome the opportunity to clarify the nature of Mr. Blake's father's estate. Very well. Mr. Mitchell, present your evidence. Carson launched into his presentation with the enthusiasm of a prosecutor going after a high-profile case. He had bank statements showing the trust deposits, property records, and a detailed analysis of what he claimed was my pattern of asset hiding. Your Honor, Frank Blake left an estate valued at approximately $95 million. Mrs. Blake, as the spouse of the primary beneficiary, is entitled to her fair share of these assets. We have reason to believe that Mr. Blake is attempting to move money offshore or otherwise hide it from the court. I watched Rachel during Carson's presentation. She was trying to look dignified and wronged, but I could see the greed in her eyes. She thought she was about to become very, very rich. Mr. Martinez? Judge Williams said when Carson finished. Gloria stood again, this time carrying a thick folder. Your Honor, I'd like to present the actual trust documents for the court's review. She handed copies to the judge and to Carson. I watched Carson's face as he read, his confident expression slowly morphing into confusion, then concern, then something approaching panic. Your Honor, Gloria continued, as you can see from the documentation, the Frank Blake estate was structured as an irrevocable charitable trust. Mr. Thomas Blake serves as trustee, but he has no beneficial interest in the principal or income. All funds must be distributed to qualified charitable organizations as outlined in the trust agreement. Judge Williams studied the documents carefully. Mr. Mitchell, did you review these trust documents before filing your motion? Carson's face had gone pale. Your Honor, that is, my client was under the impression. Did you review the trust documents, Mr. Mitchell? No, Your Honor. We relied on bank statements and Mrs. Blake's understanding of the inheritance. Mrs. Blake's understanding was incorrect. According to these documents, there are no marital assets related to the Frank Blake estate. Mr. Blake cannot access these funds for personal use, nor can they be considered part of the marital estate. I glanced at Rachel. She was staring at Carson like he'd just told her Santa Claus wasn't real. Her face had gone white, and her hands were trembling. Furthermore, Judge Williams continued, I'm troubled by the allegations of asset hiding when it appears that counsel failed to conduct basic due diligence. Mr. Mitchell, I suggest you review your client's claims more carefully before making accusations in my courtroom. Yes, Your Honor. As for temporary spousal support, I'll need a complete financial disclosure from both parties before making any determination. This hearing is adjourned pending the submission of proper documentation. The gavel came down like a gunshot. Carson was already packing his briefcase when Rachel grabbed his arm. "What just happened? You said I was entitled to half of everything." "Mrs. Blake, perhaps we should discuss this privately." "No! I want to know what just happened. Where's my money?" Her voice was getting louder, drawing stares from other people in the courtroom. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "There is no money, Rachel," I said quietly. "I tried to explain the trust structure to you years ago, but you weren't interested in the details." She whirled on me, her eyes blazing. "You're lying! You're hiding it somehow!" "The documents are public record. Your lawyer can verify everything." "This isn't over, Thomas. I know you're up to something. The only thing I'm up to is following my father's wishes and supporting charitable causes. You know, the kind of thing a good wife might support instead of trying to steal." Rachel's hand came up like she was going to slap me, but Gloria stepped between us. "Mrs. Blake, I'd suggest you discuss your options with your attorney. Privately." Rachel stormed out of the courtroom with Carson trailing behind her like a whipped dog. I could hear her voice echoing in the hallway, demanding explanations that Carson couldn't provide. "That went well," Gloria said, gathering her papers. "Better than I expected. Did you see her face when Judge Williams read the trust language?" I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. We walked out of the courthouse together, emerging into the gray November afternoon. The parking garage was attached to the building, a concrete monument to municipal architecture that smelled like car exhaust and desperation. I was unlocking my car when I heard footsteps behind me. Lance Duval was walking toward me with the kind of swagger that rich men use to intimidate people they think are beneath them. He was wearing a designer coat that probably cost more than most people's cars, and his expression suggested he thought this was going to be a very short conversation. "Thomas Blake?" "That's me." "Lance Duval. I think we need to talk." "About what?" Lance stepped closer, invading my personal space in that way bullies do when they think they have the upper hand. "About Rachel, about this divorce, about you trying to hide money that doesn't belong to you." I looked him up and down slowly, taking in the perfect hair, the manicured nails, the soft hands of a man who'd never done a day of real work in his life. "Is that what Rachel told you? That I'm hiding money?" "I know what you're doing. Moving assets around, claiming it's all tied up in some charity scam. But we both know that's bullshit." "Do we?" "Rachel deserves her fair share, and I'm going to make sure she gets it." I smiled, but it wasn't a friendly expression. "And what exactly are you going to do about it, Lance?" "Whatever it takes." "That sounds like a threat." "Take it however you want." I opened my car door, then paused as if I'd just remembered something. "You know, Lance, you might want to be careful about making threats, especially when you're standing behind someone's car." "What's that supposed to mean?" I put the car in reverse and backed out slowly. Lance had to jump sideways to avoid getting hit, and in his haste, he stumbled and fell against his pristine white Porsche. My bumper scraped along the side of his car with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard, leaving a long, ugly scratch in the expensive paint. "Oops," I said, rolling down my window. "Sorry about that. Guess money can't buy parking skills." Lance was staring at the damage to his car like I'd just eliminated his dog. "You did that on purpose." "Did I?" Seemed like an accident to me. "You might want to be more careful where you stand. Parking garages can be dangerous places." I drove away, leaving Lance standing next to his scratched Porsche, probably wondering how he was going to explain the damage to his insurance company. Or more likely, wondering how he was going to pay for the repairs, given what Eddie had told me about his financial situation. That evening, I stopped by the Glass Hammer for a drink and an update. Eddie was behind the bar as usual, and Shannon was sitting at a corner table with her laptop, probably working on the gala preparations. "How'd it go in court?" Eddie asked, sliding a bourbon across the bar. "Better than expected. Rachel's lawyer didn't do his homework. Turns out she's not entitled to money that doesn't exist." And how'd she take that news? About as well as you'd expect. She thinks I'm hiding assets. Shannon looked up from her laptop. Speaking of which, I've been doing that thing you asked me to do, dropping hints about financial difficulties. It's amazing how fast gossip travels in this town. What kind of hints? Nothing specific, just casual mentions that maybe the inheritance isn't as liquid as people thought. That you've been asking questions about refinancing the house, that you've been meeting with bankruptcy attorneys. Have people been buying it? Oh, absolutely. Janice Morrison called me yesterday fishing for information. She wanted to know if it was true that you were having money problems. Janice Morrison was Rachel's best friend and business partner, which meant anything Shannon told her would get back to Rachel within hours. It was perfect. What did you tell her? That I couldn't discuss your personal finances, but that she might want to ask Rachel if everything was okay. I may have mentioned that you seemed stressed lately. Eddie laughed. You're evil, Shannon. I like that in a woman. I'm just getting started, Shannon said. Wait until you see what I have planned for the gala. I raised my glass. To strategic misdirection. To getting even, Eddie added. To making sure the right people get what they deserve, Shannon finished. We drank to that, and for the first time in months, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Rachel thought she was playing chess, but she'd brought checkers to a poker game, and I'd been playing poker a lot longer than she'd been lying. The game was just getting started, and I was holding all the good cards. The half-built community center looked like a concrete skeleton against the November sky, all exposed beams and empty windows that stared out at the city like hollow eyes. I'd been coming here every few days to check on the construction progress, but tonight I had a different purpose. It was nearly midnight when I parked behind the building, hidden from the street by a pile of construction materials. The security lights cast long shadows across the work site, and the only sounds were the distant hum of traffic and the whistle of wind through the unfinished walls. I didn't have to wait long. A white Porsche, now sporting a long scratch along the passenger side, pulled into the parking area. Lance Duval got out, looking around nervously before approaching the building. He was carrying a flashlight and what looked like a small crowbar. I watched from the shadows as he jimmied open a side door and disappeared inside. Whatever Rachel had sent him to find, he was taking this breaking and entering thing seriously. Too bad for him that I'd anticipated this move. I gave him 10 minutes to get comfortable, then followed him inside. The interior of the building was a maze of plastic sheeting, construction equipment, and exposed wiring. Lance's flashlight beam bounced around the main room as he searched through boxes of paperwork and construction documents. He was looking for financial records, probably hoping to find evidence that I was skimming money from the project. Find anything interesting? I asked. Lance spun around, his flashlight beam catching me square in the face. Jesus, you scared the hell out of me. That's what happens when you break into other people's buildings, Lance. You tend to get jumpy. I wasn't breaking in. The door was open. Was it? That's funny, because I'm pretty sure I saw you jimmy the lock. But hey, maybe I was mistaken. Lance straightened up, trying to recover his composure. I was just looking around. Rachel mentioned that you were building something here, and I wanted to see what kind of project would require such a large investment. The kind that actually helps people instead of lining someone's pockets. Novel concept, I know. Cut the act, Thomas. We both know you're skimming money from this charity scam. I walked closer, my footsteps echoing in the empty space. Charity scam? That's an interesting way to describe a community center that's going to provide job training and after-school programs for kids who need them. Nobody gives away $95 million to charity. Nobody. My father did. But then you never met Frank Blake. He understood the difference between earning money and stealing it. Lance's face flushed red. Are you implying something? I'm not implying anything, Lance. I'm stating it directly. You're a broke art dealer who's been lying to my wife about your financial situation, and now you're breaking into my construction site looking for evidence that doesn't exist. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? Let's see. Your gallery is 3 months behind on rent. You owe $40,000 to contractors who worked on your penthouse. And your Porsche? That's leased, and you're 2 payments behind. Lance's jaw dropped. How do you know all that? It's amazing what you can learn when you actually do your homework, unlike some people. I walked over to a pile of wet cement that the workers had mixed but not used. It was still soft, probably ruined by now, but it would serve my purposes perfectly. You know what your problem is, Lance? You're an art dealer, but you don't understand the most basic principle of art, which is authenticity. Real art has value because it's genuine. Fake art is worthless, no matter how pretty it looks. I grabbed Lance by the shoulder and shoved him toward the cement pile. He stumbled, his expensive shoes sliding on the plastic sheeting, and fell backward into the wet concrete. And you, my friend, are about as fake as they come. Lance struggled to get up, but the cement was thick and sticky. His designer coat was ruined, his perfect hair was full of concrete dust, and his shoes, which probably cost more than most people made in a week, were completely destroyed. You're insane, he sputtered. Maybe, but I'm not the one breaking into buildings and lying to married women about my net worth. I pulled out my phone and took a picture. Smile, Lance. This one's going in my insurance file. You know, in case anything happens to my construction site. You can't do this. Can't do what? Defend my property against a burglar? I think most people would call that reasonable. Lance finally managed to extract himself from the cement, but the damage was done. He looked like he'd been wrestling with a concrete mixer and lost. This isn't over, he said, trying to salvage what was left of his dignity. You're right about that. In fact, it's just getting started. The next morning, I called Shannon and asked her to schedule a meeting with the local newspaper. The community center was ready for its public debut, and I wanted to make sure everyone in town knew about the Frank Blake Foundation's generous donation. How generous are we talking? Shannon asked. $15 million. Enough to complete construction, fund operations for 5 years, and establish an endowment for future programs. Shannon whistled. That's going to make headlines. That's the idea. I want everyone in town to know that the Blake family is committed to helping the community, especially people who might have heard rumors about financial difficulties. Speaking of which, those rumors are really starting to spread. Janice called again yesterday, and this time she seemed genuinely concerned. She asked if Rachel knew about your money problems. What did you tell her? That she should talk to Rachel directly, but I may have mentioned that you'd been asking about liquidating some investments. Perfect. What about the gala preparations? Everything's on schedule. We've got the ballroom at the Riverside Hotel, catering by Morrison's, and a jazz quartet for entertainment. The guest list includes everyone who matters in this town, plus a few surprises. Surprises? Let's just say that some of Rachel's friends might be learning some interesting things about her personal life. That afternoon, I met with Jim Patterson from the city newspaper. Jim was a veteran reporter who'd been covering local business and charity news for 20 years, and he had the kind of skeptical eye that made politicians nervous. $15 million is a substantial donation, he said, reviewing the press materials Shannon had prepared. What inspired such generosity? My father believed that success carries responsibility. He spent his life building wealth, but he always intended for that wealth to benefit the community that supported him. And this community center will serve low-income families? Primarily, yes. We'll offer job training programs, after-school tutoring, and adult education classes. The goal is to give people the tools they need to build better lives for themselves and their families. Jim scribbled notes on his pad. I understand you're having a fundraising gala to announce the donation? Next Saturday night. It's a way to celebrate the project and thank the community for their support. Will your wife be attending? I paused, as if the question had caught me off guard. I certainly hope so. Rachel has always been supportive of my charitable work. I heard there might be some personal challenges you're dealing with right now. I don't discuss my personal life with the press, Jim, but I will say that sometimes people's true priorities become clear when they're tested. Jim nodded, understanding the subtext. The article will run on Friday, the day before the gala. Perfect timing. That evening, Rachel came home earlier than usual, which meant she'd probably heard about the newspaper interview. She found me in the kitchen, making dinner for one. "I heard you talked to Jim Patterson today," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "News travels fast in a small town." $15 million, Thomas? Don't you think that's a bit excessive? I looked at her over my shoulder. Excessive? For helping kids get an education and job training? I guess that depends on your priorities. That's not what I meant, and you know it. Do I? What did you mean, Rachel? She sat down at the kitchen island, her expression a mixture of anger and desperation. I meant that giving away that much money right now, in the middle of divorce proceedings, looks suspicious. Suspicious to whom? To anyone who's paying attention. It looks like you're trying to hide assets. I turned to face her fully. Rachel, for the last time, I cannot hide assets that I don't own. The money belongs to the Frank Blake Foundation. I'm just the trustee. I don't believe you. Your belief isn't required. The legal documents speak for themselves. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she looked up, there were tears in her eyes, but I couldn't tell if they were real or calculated. What happened to us, Thomas? We used to be happy. We used to be a lot of things, honest, for one. What's that supposed to mean? It means I know about Lance, Rachel. I've known for weeks. The tears stopped as if I'd flipped a switch. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you don't. Just like you didn't know anyone named Lance when I asked you about him before. Thomas, save it. We both know where this is heading. The only question is whether you want to do this with dignity or turn it into a circus. Rachel stood up, her expression hardening. If you think I'm going to just walk away from 22 years of marriage with nothing, you're mistaken. You're not walking away with nothing, Rachel. You're walking away with exactly what you brought to the marriage. Your business, your personal belongings, and your share of whatever legitimate marital assets we've accumulated. And what about what I've contributed? What about the years I spent supporting your career? What about the years I spent building that career while you spent the money I earned? What about the years I trusted you while you planned your exit strategy? She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. For a moment I saw a flash of the woman I'd married, vulnerable, uncertain, human. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. The gala is Saturday night, I said. You're welcome to attend as my wife, or you can stay home and explain to your friends why you weren't there. Either way, the Frank Blake Foundation is moving forward with or without your support. Rachel left the kitchen without another word. A few minutes later, I heard her car pulling out of the driveway. I finished making my dinner and ate it alone, thinking about the conversation and what it meant. Rachel was getting desperate, which made her dangerous. Desperate people make mistakes, but they also take bigger risks. I had a feeling the real game was about to begin. The Riverside Hotel ballroom had been transformed into something that looked like a cross between a charity gala and a wedding reception. Shannon had outdone herself. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in white linen, and the jazz quartet was playing something smooth and sophisticated that made conversation feel important. I stood near the entrance, greeting guests as they arrived. The guest list read like a who's who of the city's business and social elite. People who wrote checks to worthy causes and expected their generosity to be noticed and appreciated. Thomas! Mayor Davidson pumped my hand enthusiastically. $15 million! That's the kind of community leadership this city needs. Thank you, Mayor. My father would be pleased to know his legacy is making a difference. Where's Rachel tonight? I was hoping to congratulate her as well. I glanced around the ballroom. Rachel had arrived 20 minutes ago, wearing a black dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. She was holding court at a table near the bar, surrounded by her usual circle of friends and admirers. She's here somewhere. You know how these events are. Everyone wants to catch up. What I didn't tell the mayor was that Rachel had barely spoken to me since arriving. She'd posed for pictures with a smile that could have frozen water, then immediately gravitated toward her friends and a steady supply of wine. Thomas Blake. I turned to see Carson Mitchell approaching with a woman I didn't recognize. Carson looked like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world, but his companion seemed genuinely pleased to meet me. Carson, I said neutrally. I didn't expect to see you here. This is my wife, Jennifer. She insisted we attend when she heard about the donation. Jennifer Mitchell was nothing like what I'd expected from Carson's wife. She was warm, genuine, and seemed genuinely interested in the community center project. Mr. Blake, what you're doing for the community is wonderful. Carson tells me you're funding the entire operation through your family foundation. That's right. My father believed that success should be shared with the people who make it possible. How refreshing. So many wealthy families just hoard their money or spend it on themselves. I caught Carson's expression out of the corner of my eye. He looked like he was developing an ulcer in real time. Well, I said, my father was a mechanic who understood the value of honest work. He wanted his money to help other people build better lives. A mechanic who left $95 million? Jennifer looked impressed. He must have been quite a businessman. He was. He also understood the difference between building wealth and just accumulating it. Carson cleared his throat. Jennifer, perhaps we should find our table. Of course. Mr. Blake, thank you for what you're doing. The community is lucky to have you. After they walked away, I noticed Lance Duval entering the ballroom. He'd cleaned up since our encounter at the construction site, but there was something different about his usual swagger. He looked around nervously, like a man who wasn't sure he belonged here. He made his way directly to Rachel's table, whispering something in her ear that made her face go pale. Whatever he was telling her, she wasn't happy about it. I was watching their interaction when Shannon appeared at my elbow. Interesting guest list tonight, she said quietly. How so? Well, for starters, 3 of Rachel's biggest clients are here, and they've all been asking questions about her business practices. What kind of questions? The kind that suggest they might be looking for new interior designers. I raised an eyebrow. That's unfortunate. Isn't it? I may have mentioned to a few people that Rachel's been distracted lately by personal issues. Nothing specific, of course, just concern for her professional focus. Shannon, you're terrible. I prefer thorough. The evening progressed smoothly until dinner was served. I was seated at the head table with the mayor, several city council members, and the foundation board. Rachel was at a table across the room with Lance and her usual social circle. During the main course, I noticed a commotion at Rachel's table. Voices were being raised, and several people were looking uncomfortable. Rachel appeared to be arguing with someone, her face flushed with wine and anger. Excuse me, I said to the mayor. I should check on my wife. I made my way across the ballroom, catching fragments of conversation as I approached. Completely inappropriate. How could you not tell us? This is exactly the kind of thing. Rachel saw me coming, and her expression shifted from angry to desperate. Thomas, thank God. Please tell these people that the rumors about our finances aren't true. The table went quiet. Everyone was staring at me, waiting for an explanation. What rumors? I asked. About you being broke, said Patricia Hoffman, one of Rachel's clients. About the inheritance being tied up in legal problems. I looked around the table, taking in the faces of people I'd known for years. They were confused, concerned, and clearly uncomfortable with whatever conversation they'd been having. I'm not sure where you heard that, I said carefully. But as you can see from tonight's donation, the Blake Family Foundation is in excellent financial health. But what about your personal finances? Patricia pressed. Rachel seemed to think, I think there might be some confusion about the difference between personal assets and foundation assets, I said. The foundation has substantial resources for charitable purposes. My personal situation is more complicated. It wasn't technically a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. I watched as the people at the table processed this information, their expressions shifting from confusion to understanding, to something approaching pity. Oh, Rachel, Patricia said softly. I'm so sorry, I had no idea. Rachel's face went white. No, that's not. Thomas, tell them. Tell them what, Rachel? Tell them about the money, about the inheritance. I just did. The inheritance went to the foundation, for charity. The silence at the table was deafening. I could see the moment when everyone understood what had happened. Rachel had been counting on money that was never hers to begin with. Lance chose that moment to lean forward and insert himself into the conversation. This is all very convenient, isn't it, Thomas? All this money for charity, right when you're getting divorced. I'm sorry, who are you? Asked Patricia. Lance Duval. I'm a friend of Rachel's. A friend? The way Patricia said it made it clear that she understood exactly what kind of friend Lance was. The temperature at the table seemed to drop 10 degrees. Mr. Duval, I said pleasantly, I don't believe you were invited to this event. Rachel invited me. Did she? That's interesting, because this is a charity fundraiser for married couples and individual donors. I don't recall seeing your name on the donation list. Lance's face flushed red. I don't need to justify my presence to you. Actually, you do. This is a private event and you're here as someone's guest. The question is whose. Everyone at the table was staring at Rachel now, waiting for her to explain why she'd brought another man to a charity event with her husband. Lance is... He's helping me with some business matters, Rachel said weakly. Business matters? I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. What kind of business matters require bringing a date to your husband's charity gala? He's not my date. No? Then what would you call it when a married woman brings another man to a social event and introduces him as her friend? The conversation was drawing attention from other tables now. People were turning to stare, and I could see phones coming out as the city's social elite prepared to document whatever drama was unfolding. Lance stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. I don't have to listen to this. You're right, I agreed. You don't. Security will be happy to escort you out. You can't throw me out. Actually, I can. This is a private event hosted by my foundation. You're here without an invitation, disrupting the evening and making our guests uncomfortable. I gestured to two security guards who'd been standing near the entrance. They began walking toward our table. Lance looked around desperately, realizing that he'd lost whatever game he thought he was playing. Rachel, are you going to let him do this? All eyes turned to Rachel. She was trapped between defending her lover and maintaining what was left of her social standing. The choice she made would define how this community saw her for years to come. I think maybe you should go, Lance. The betrayal on Lance's face was almost comical. Are you serious? This isn't the time or place for complications. Lance stared at her for a long moment, then laughed bitterly. Complications? That's what I am now? Please don't make a scene. A scene? Rachel, you brought me to your husband's charity gala, and now you're throwing me out to save face. I'd say the scene is already made. The security guards reached our table. Sir, we're going to need you to come with us. Lance looked around the table one more time, his expression a mixture of anger and humiliation. You people deserve each other, he said finally. As the guards escorted Lance toward the exit, the ballroom buzzed with whispered conversations. Everyone had witnessed the confrontation, and by tomorrow morning the entire city would know that Rachel Blake had brought another man to her husband's charity event. Rachel sat frozen in her chair, staring at her hands. The friends who'd been sitting with her were avoiding eye contact, clearly uncomfortable with being associated with the evening's drama. "Well," I said, breaking the awkward silence, "I should get back to the head table. The mayor is expecting me to make some remarks about the foundation." I walked away, leaving Rachel to face the consequences of her choices alone. The rest of the evening proceeded smoothly, but I could feel the undercurrent of gossip and speculation running through the crowd. By the time I gave my speech about the community center and my father's legacy, everyone in the room understood the real story. Thomas Blake was giving away a fortune to help others, while his wife was planning to leave him for a man who'd just publicly humiliated her. When the evening finally ended, Rachel was nowhere to be found. Someone said they'd seen her leave through a side exit shortly after Lance was escorted out. I drove home alone, thinking about the evening and what it meant. Rachel had made her choice, and it hadn't been the smart one. She'd chosen immediate gratification over long-term strategy, and now she was paying the price. But I had a feeling this was just the beginning. Desperate people don't give up easily, and Rachel Blake had never been the type to go quietly. The real war was about to begin. I found Lance Duval in the parking garage beneath his penthouse building at 7 in the morning, standing next to his scratched Porsche with the hood up and a look of pure frustration on his face. "Car trouble?" I asked, approaching from behind. Lance spun around, his face cycling through surprise, anger, and something that might have been fear. "What are you doing here?" "I was in the neighborhood. Thought I'd check on how you were handling your recent setbacks." "My setbacks?" "Well, let's see. You were publicly humiliated at the charity gala, thrown out by security, and abandoned by the woman you thought was going to make you rich. Oh, and now your car won't start. That's what I'd call a bad week." Lance's jaw tightened. "Did you do something to my car?" "Me? I'm just a simple businessman, Lance. I wouldn't know the first thing about sabotaging expensive German engineering." It was technically true. I hadn't sabotaged his car. Eddie had done that, using skills he'd learned during his brief career as a repo man. Nothing permanent, nothing that would cause an accident, just a few disconnected wires that would keep the engine from starting until a mechanic could figure out the problem. "You're lying." "Am I? That's a serious accusation. Do you have any proof?" Lance stared at me for a long moment, clearly wanting to say something but smart enough to realize he had no evidence and no leverage. "What do you want, Thomas?" "I want to have a conversation, man to man, about Rachel, about money, and about the future." "I have nothing to say to you." "That's unfortunate, because I have quite a bit to say to you." I walked closer, close enough that Lance had to look up slightly to meet my eyes. He was taller than me, but he carried himself like a man who'd never been in a real fight and hoped he never would be. "Here's what's going to happen," I said quietly. "You're going to disappear from Rachel's life, completely. No phone calls, no text messages, no accidental encounters at coffee shops, nothing. You can't make me do anything." "Can I? Let me paint you a picture, Lance. You're 3 months behind on your gallery rent. You owe contractors $40,000. Your car is leased, and you're behind on payments. Your penthouse? Also leased, and the landlord has been asking questions about your ability to pay." Lance's face went pale. "How do you know all that? It's amazing what people will tell you when you ask the right questions. Your landlord, for instance, was very interested to learn that you've been representing yourself as a wealthy art dealer to married women. That's not illegal." "No, but fraud is, and I'm pretty sure that some of those art pieces you've been selling come with questionable provenance documentation." Lance's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "You're bluffing." "Am I? Would you like to bet your freedom on that?" I pulled out my phone and showed him a series of photographs, pictures of Lance breaking into the community center, pictures of him with Rachel at various restaurants and hotels, and several documents that showed the true state of his finances. "You've been investigating me." I've been protecting my interests. There's a difference. Lance leaned back against his car, the fight going out of him like air from a punctured tire. What do you want? I want you gone, Lance. Out of the city, out of Rachel's life, out of my problems. There's a nice little gallery space available in Phoenix. The rent is reasonable and the art scene is growing. You could make a fresh start. And if I don't? Then I make some phone calls. To your creditors, to the IRS, to a few art dealers I know who might be interested in your business practices. How long do you think it would take for your entire life to collapse? Lance was quiet for a long moment, staring at his broken-down car and probably thinking about his broken-down life. When he looked up, there was defeat in his eyes. How long do I have? A week. Clean out your gallery, pack your things, and disappear. Do that, and I'll make sure your creditors get paid enough to keep you out of legal trouble. You'd do that? I'd do that. Not for you, but because I want this mess cleaned up with a minimum of complications. Lance nodded slowly. And Rachel? Rachel is my problem, not yours. You made your choice at the gala when you threw her under the bus to save yourself. Now live with it. I started to walk away, then turned back. Oh, and Lance? If I ever see you in this city again, if you ever contact my wife again, if you ever even think about causing me problems again, I'll destroy you. Not financially, personally. Do we understand each other? Yes. Good. Have a nice life in Phoenix. I left Lance standing next to his broken car in the parking garage, probably wondering how his plan to marry into money had gone so spectacularly wrong. The answer was simple. He'd underestimated his opponent and overestimated his own abilities. In poker, that's called getting schooled. That afternoon, I drove to Rachel's design studio downtown. It was a sleek, modern space in a converted warehouse, the kind of place where wealthy people went to spend ridiculous amounts of money on furniture and decorative objects. Rachel was alone in the showroom, sitting at her desk and staring at her computer screen with the expression of someone reading very bad news. Busy day? I asked. She looked up, and I was surprised to see that she'd been crying. Her makeup was smudged, and her eyes were red and puffy. The Henderson account canceled this morning, she said quietly, and the Johnsons, and Patricia Hoffman. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you? Are you really sorry, Thomas? Or is this exactly what you wanted? I sat down in one of her expensive chairs, a piece that probably cost more than most people's cars. What I wanted was a wife who was honest with me. What I got was a woman who spent months planning to leave me for another man while pretending to love me. I did love you. Past tense. That's telling. Rachel wiped her eyes with a tissue, smearing her mascara further. What do you want, Thomas? Haven't you punished me enough? Punished you? Rachel, I haven't done anything to you. I haven't spread rumors. I haven't sabotaged your business. I haven't interfered with your relationship with Lance. All I've done is tell the truth about my financial situation and let people draw their own conclusions. You orchestrated everything. The gala, the confrontation, all of it. I hosted a charity fundraiser. You brought another man as your date. I'm not sure how that's my fault. Rachel stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city street below. Lance left this morning, packed up his gallery, and drove out of town without even saying goodbye. I'm sorry. No, you're not. You're pleased. This is exactly what you wanted. What I wanted was a marriage that worked. What I got was a wife who thought she could trade me in for a newer model with better financing. She turned around, and for a moment I saw a flash of the woman I'd married, vulnerable, uncertain, human. I made mistakes, Thomas. I know that. But did you have to destroy everything? I didn't destroy anything, Rachel. I just stopped pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. So, what happens now? Now we get divorced. You take your business, your personal belongings, and your share of whatever legitimate marital assets we've accumulated. I keep the house, the foundation, and my business. We both move on with our lives. And that's it? 22 years of marriage and that's all there is? I stood up and walked toward the door, then paused and looked back at her. You know what the really sad part is, Rachel? If you'd just talked to me, if you'd told me you were unhappy, if you'd asked for counseling, if you'd been honest about what you wanted, we might have been able to work things out. But instead you chose to lie, to cheat, and to plan your exit strategy based on money that was never yours to begin with. I was scared. Of what? Of being poor. Of not having security. Of ending up like my mother, dependent on a man who might leave. So you decided to leave first. I decided to protect myself. I shook my head. You decided to gamble everything on a man you barely knew, based on money that didn't exist. That's not protection, Rachel. That's just greed. I left her standing in her showroom, surrounded by expensive furniture and broken dreams. Outside, the November air was cold and sharp, but it felt clean after the stale atmosphere of lies and recrimination. That evening, I met Eddie and Shannon at the Glass Hammer for what had become our regular strategy session. The bar was quiet, just a few regulars watching the game and nursing their drinks. So, Lance is gone? Eddie asked. Drove out of town this morning. I don't think we'll be seeing him again. And Rachel? Lost 3 major clients today. Her business partner Janice is probably going to dissolve their partnership. Word gets around fast in this town. Shannon raised her beer. To the power of truth and consequences. To getting what you deserve, Eddie added. To moving on, I finished. We drank to that, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe freely. The game was over, the pieces were off the board, and I'd won not through cheating or manipulation, but by simply refusing to play by rules that were designed to let other people take advantage of me. A week later, the divorce papers were signed. Rachel got her business, her car, and about $50,000 in cash, her share of our joint savings account, and the equity in some investments we'd made together. I got everything else, which wasn't much, since most of my father's money had always been in the foundation. The local newspaper ran a follow-up story about the community center, which was now fully funded and ready to begin operations. The article mentioned that the Blake Family Foundation had committed to supporting the project for the next decade, ensuring that it would continue to serve the community for years to come. Rachel moved to Chicago, where she had a sister and some distant prospects for rebuilding her interior design business. I heard through the grapevine that she was struggling, but I also heard that she was working hard and trying to rebuild her reputation through honest work instead of shortcuts. Lance, as far as I knew, had disappeared into Arizona and was no longer my problem. 6 months later, I was standing in the completed community center, watching kids from the neighborhood use the computer lab and the tutoring center. The place was everything my father had envisioned, a space where people could learn skills, get help, and build better lives for themselves and their families. Pretty good return on investment, Shannon said, joining me by the window. The best kind. The kind that keeps paying dividends long after you're gone. Any regrets? I thought about that for a moment. About the marriage? Yeah, I regret that it had to end the way it did. About the money? No, this is exactly what my father would have wanted. And about Rachel? I hope she finds what she's looking for, just not at someone else's expense. Shannon smiled. You're a better man than I would have been in your situation. No, I'm just a man who learned the difference between winning and getting even. Getting even is temporary. Winning lasts. That night, I went home to my quiet house and sat in my father's old chair, thinking about the last year and what it had taught me. I'd lost a wife, but I'd kept my integrity. I'd given away a fortune, but I'd gained something more valuable. The knowledge that I could face betrayal and disappointment without becoming bitter or vindictive. The floorboard upstairs still creaked sometimes, but I'd stopped trying to fix it. Some sounds were just part of the house's character, reminders of the people who'd lived there and the stories they'd left behind. I raised a glass of bourbon to the empty room. Here's to you, Dad. Your money is doing exactly what you wanted it to do. Outside, the November wind rattled the windows, but inside, everything was exactly as it should be. I was Thomas Blake, son of Frank Blake, trustee of the Frank Blake Foundation, and a man who'd learned that the best revenge isn't getting even. It's living well and helping others do the same. The game was over, and everyone had gotten exactly what they deserved.